Now, hi everyone, Jason here from Spiritual Babies. We have been joined by Rabbi Stuart Federer, and today I'm going to be asking the question, what can I expect if I go to synagogue? So I know that there's a lot of people on the Facebook feed who haven't been, or they've maybe been to one and they're wondering what it's like in maybe different types of synagogues, what different people think. Maybe you're worried about going because you think you'll stand out or you won't be allowed in. And these are all valid questions, and we want to make you feel more comfortable about going and pursuing that and seeing what it's like and if it's a comfortable place for you to go. So, first of all, thank you for giving us your time today, Rabbi Federer.
It's my pleasure. It's always good to talk to you and see you, Jason.
Now, before we start, can you tell us a little bit about your synagogue, what branch of Judaism it is? And then I'm going to
Okay.
ask you some very personal questions about that synagogue based on statements that I've heard about some forms of Judaism.
Okay. My congregation is, for lack of a better term, very weird. It was founded in the 1960s as the Synagogue for NASA, National Aeronautical Space Administration, the space program. When Houston the Eagle has landed, when the NASA program came to Houston, thanks to Lyndon Baines Johnson, president, the a large number of people who were scientists, engineers, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, all these engineers and scientists, many of whom were Jews. And so they founded the congregation, but it was a struggle because the scientists, the Jewish scientists who came to Houston, ran the gamut of Reform, Conservative, Orthodox. And so my congregation was founded as a compromise between all three movements. So the services that we run, for example, if you're Reform or if you're Conservative or if you're Orthodox, you will see elements of everybody else's. You'll be used to what you're used to, and you'll look at the services and you'll say, "Wait, we don't do that. Oh, we do that." And so it's basically services by compromise, and those services have been done the way we do them for 53 years roughly.
Wow. So it's very, to do a segue to the NASA thing, it's kind of universal.
Well, I don't know if it's universal, because someone who is Orthodox is still going to miss a lot of Orthodox customs. Okay, or customs, and they're going to miss hearing the service done the way it is done in an Orthodox synagogue, purely in Hebrew, because as a compromise, our service is about 50-50 Hebrew to English. Can I begin at least by saying this? If you're thinking about going to services, if you're worried about going to services, please just go. If it's a large congregation, you are not going to stand out. If it is a smaller congregation, you'll stand out, but that works in your favor, because in a large congregation, people are used to seeing others that they don't know. So if they see one more person they don't know, they shrug their shoulders and don't do anything about it. But in the smaller congregations, when they see someone they don't know, they're more inclined to go up to them and say, "Hi, how are you? Welcome. What brings you here?" And it's a much warmer, usually, in my opinion, much warmer place, because they see you and they know you're new. But it's unusual to have somebody new, so they do something about it. Come up to you and say, "Hi, welcome." So just go. Don't worry about if you're going to stand out, if you're going to do something wrong. It doesn't matter. Just go.
Here in Ireland and through most of Europe, if I was to just turn up at synagogue and they didn't know me, they wouldn't let me in. Because there are gates and there are security these days. You have to email ahead. Is it still a smart move if you're in the States to email ahead and let people know that you're interested?
Well, it'd be nice to call, and no matter what congregation, no matter how large the congregation, and say, "Look, I'm either new to the area or new to Judaism or whatever, and I'd like to come to services." And they'll say, "Oh, come right ahead. Would love to see you. You should get a very warm reception, at least by phone. Email, nah, I'd pick up the phone and call, frankly. I just think that's you get a more personal response because you're talking to, a voice on the phone. But it would be
yeah.
nice. It would be nice. You're right. It would be nice to call ahead.
And so, especially if you're in the UK or in Europe at the moment, it's always a good idea to let them know that you're interested in coming, and they'll usually ask for a form of ID on the door, just giving people a heads up, because it's a scary
Right.
place in Europe at the moment for Jewish
Of
communities.
course. Of course. Yeah. Which
So,
is sad. That's very sad.
for people that don't know, can you give us a very ballpark breakdown of what is Orthodox, what is conservative, and what is Reform?
Theologically, or in terms of services, or
I,
what do you
I,
mean?
I think a little bit of both, if you can. If I was going to an Orthodox synagogue, there would be very different, well, not very different, but there'd be some differences, wouldn't there, to if I was going to a conservative or liberal synagogue?
Absolutely, but there is one thing that would not be different, and that is dress. Okay, it would be nice. Look, in my congregation, I have people who will literally show up in uh, jeans. They may be fashion jeans, but they're still jeans. To me, they're jeans. Okay, but they'll be there in jeans and a shirt. Okay, uh, and by that I mean a nicer shirt, not a t-shirt or something, or a sweatshirt, whatever. Uh, but it would be nice if you're going to a congregation for the first time, first of all, to call ahead, like you said, but you may ask, what do people generally wear? Some places, no matter how large or small they are far more laid back than they are in other congregations. So you may want to call ahead. But by and large, men are going to want to wear a nice pair of slacks and a nice shirt, if not a suit and tie. Uh, Nowadays, I think most congregations are less formal. Not sure how I feel about that, but that's the way it is. And I'd rather have them, sitting in the pews, sitting in the seats, than not coming because they feel, just come. Uh, okay, so differences. Jason, I have seen such nonsense. People who don't know anything at all about Reform or conservative or even Orthodox making bold statements about this is what they do, this is what they believe, this is how they act, this is the history, this is how they came into existence. And I will be as polite as I can in saying this. They don't know their tushy from a hole in the wall. They're absolutely wrong in what they think about the history of all of the movements. So, first of all, the Orthodox never called themselves the Orthodox, but there are certain basic beliefs that that underlie the Orthodox theology and philosophy and behaviors, and that's what really defines them as being Orthodox. Their certain beliefs are that God spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai and gave Moses two Torahs, one written and one oral. And I don't see how anybody can pick up the Tanakh and read it without knowing there has to be more behind what's there. But be that as it may, these are assumptions that were held by the Jewish community really worldwide up until 200, 250 years ago, give or take. I'm not a historian, but I know the process actually quite well. Okay, the Reform movement as a movement began in Germany, in Europe, because in the late 1700s, early 1800s, the Jewish community was finally allowed by the Christian community to get out of the ghetto, to mix with the non-Jewish community socially, to have businesses and to own property in many European countries for the first time in history. And what would happen is that the Jews would leave the Jewish ghettos and shtetls. Really, it's a German thing, so I'd say more like ghetto. And they would look back at what they left. They would look forward at who they were mingling with, namely the Christian community, be they Catholic or Protestant. And they didn't like what they saw when they looked backwards, because what they saw were the Jews of the ghetto, okay, who seemed frozen in time from their perspective. When they left the ghetto, they also appeared to be leaving Judaism. And the lay people, not the rabbis, in the Orthodox congregations, because that's all that existed, said, look, if we're going to keep the Jews Jewish and tied to the Jewish community and tied to our faith, we're going to have to change things in our services. And they reformed, okay, that's a verb, they reformed the service, frankly, modeling it on the Protestant church service, where there was part of the what's called the vernacular, the fancy term for whatever the local language is. They added a sermon, because up until then, sermons were only given twice a year, once on the Shabbat between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, mainly to talk about the Yom Kippur themes. And the other time was the Shabbat preceding Passover, Pesach. And because the laws of Passover are enormous, there's plenty of them, and so all about the food and the just everything, and that would be the sermon topic twice a year. The sermon topics twice a year, and everything else was just services. Okay,
that's very interesting. I didn't know that. So the kind of we'll get the Torah portion read or the half Torah portion read, and generally there'll be a 20-minute thing after that. So that's not part of the Orthodox service.
Are you talking about Saturday?
Mm.
I'm talking about the Friday night,
Erev Shabbat, okay.
and Erev Shabbat, but also Saturday as well, because what they did, there's a lot of repetition of the services in an Orthodox synagogue, and they streamlined the service because it was the only way to keep the Jews in the Jewish community. And it was done by the lay people because they saw their kids, what we now call going off the derech, they becoming, no longer observant. Mm. And the only thing they could do to keep them coming back was to model the service on what basically is the Protestant service. So they introduced a sermon. They eliminated a lot or most or all, depends on which congregation you're talking about. And remember, these were congregations that were originally Orthodox because they were trying to keep the Jews who were leaving the ghetto, not to come back to the ghetto, but to come back at least to services and God. And it worked. And it created a movement that is called the Reform Movement. Once the lay people started changing the service and they saw that it was keeping Jews within the Jewish community, now you had the rabbis who would comb the Chazal, the writings of the rabbis over the past 1,700 years, 1,800 years, whatever, because we're talking 250 years ago when it first began. And they started justifying it, looking through tradition, looking through the Talmud and other rabbinic books to justify what they'd done, what their lay people had done. Because remember, lay people ran the services, not the rabbis. Okay. That gave rise to the Reform movement. So the Reform movement, springing out of Orthodoxy, or what we call Orthodoxy. Remember, they never call themselves Orthodox because they're the assumptions they made about Torah, about Halakha, were these assumptions made by everybody up until the Enlightenment and the allowing the Jews out of the ghetto. So they streamlined the service, and then they started looking at the belief system and saying, maybe our beliefs should express our actions, or our actions are expressing our beliefs. And they started looking in the Talmud, looking in, the books, to try to come up with a uh, philosophy, I guess you'd say, of Judaism that matched the times, and being out of the ghetto, out of the shtetl, out of, and mixing with regular, with basic Christian society.
I just want to say quickly as well for the people that are listening, we're talking like super generically at the moment, and
Absolutely.
I don't want you to think that just because we might say something here, that's the norm for all synagogues that come under that banner, because you really won't know
Absolutely.
what your synagogue preaches or believes until you go and spend time there.
And meet with a rabbi
Mm.
before or after you're going to this, attending the services. You know, Jason, let me tell you just real quickly. There's the on-campus Jewish organization for students all over the world is called Hillel. And I was the Hillel director for all of the campuses in Houston, Texas, for 6 years, from '89 to '95. And every year we would have the first service I did. Jokingly, I called Shabbat Hanasich Hakatan, which means the Sabbath of the Little Prince. Are you familiar with the book, The Little Prince? Okay, good. Thank you. You may remember, and I would read this, okay, as the sermon, I guess you'd call it, where the little prince meets the fox. And the fox, he's never seen a fox. And the fox, in talking to him, says, I wish you would tame me. And the little prince says, what does that mean, to tame? And the fox says to the little prince, it means we come to the same place at the same time. And after a while of meeting this way, I start looking forward to hearing the sound of your footsteps. Okay, and I get comfortable in your presence. And over time, we become great friends. And I tame you and you tame me. And that's the analogy, and why I say to someone that when you come to services, you cannot judge the service, the people, the rabbi by coming once. You have to come, I'd say, at least a month, at least 4 times. And I'd say Friday nights as well as Saturday mornings. Because over time, the service tames you and you tame the service. Because like the fox said in The Little Prince, you keep coming and I start getting used to it, getting used to you, and I tame you and you tame me, and the service tames you and you tame the service. And I would say to them, our Hillel service is not what you're used to. We try to cover everything for everybody, but that never works. My synagogue's an example, but just joking. No, I'm not. Just joking. No, I'm not. Okay. And if someone is an outsider, they come to my synagogue, they're not going to find what they came from. Okay. Whether we admit it or not every Orthodox synagogue does services exactly like every other synagogue. If they're singing something, an old traditional tune, one part of the singing may go upscale, and they're not used to it going upscale right there, and there are differences, minor or not. So I would read The Little Prince and say to the students, you got to keep coming to tame the service, to make the service your own, and hopefully the service will also tame you. And that's what I would say to the people listening.
So there are differences between the Orthodox movement and the now Reform movement. I think it's fair to say that the Reform movement named the original movement Orthodox, and one of those differences is this might affect what people choose to try first. One of them is a seating arrangement, right? In Orthodox
absolutely.
synagogues, you're going to find that they separate men from women.
Exactly, and even though this may sound strange to our ears, the world has experienced the separation of men and women. Think about colleges. Okay, Harvard has Radcliffe. Brown had Pembroke. Okay, for studies, you separated the sexes because it was distracting to what you were doing. Well, services, religious services for the Jewish community are no different. To make it where you're thinking about God, not, gee, I'd like to meet the pretty girl I'm sitting next to, they separate the sexes. It's exactly like why they separated the sexes in college. And for colleges, they found out that women in the presence of men in a classroom lose out because the teachers will be more likely to call on male students than they will the female students, because, especially, by the way, in the sciences. So it's to the women's advantage to sit separately for school. They did the same thing. Look, remember that women don't have the obligations that men do of coming to services, because they understand the passage of time inherently with their bodies. The men and women and the whole misconception of Judaism and how we treat women could be it could be its own topic. But men are the ones who are obligated to come to services. Women can come, but they're not fulfilling an obligation when they come. And therefore, there's a separation between the men and the women in order that they can concentrate on their services and not, gee, that guy's handsome, I hope I can meet him after, that's to eliminate that, or at least minimize it.
I can give two examples that I like to give so in my spare time, I donate some time to the local Jewish museum, and upstairs in that is an old synagogue that was used. And we'll get people come in, and sometimes if they don't know about Judaism, or even if they do and they're kind of very modern look out of Judaism, they'll think that the separation is kind of prehistoric and medieval. And I give two examples. One, the cinema. I personally would love it if you could go to some movies and they would separate men from women. So if I'm watching the brand new Star Wars movie, I'm not getting, what's his name again? Where's he come from? Would you like one of these sweets? I'm going to go and get a drink. I'm like, just look, an hour and a half. That's all you have to do. Leave me alone for an hour and a half. It's not all women, just some. And the other thing was when I was at the hotel, so my wife went off to pray at the women's area, and I went to the men's area, and I didn't have to concern myself with whether she'd finished or was she comfortable, or I had the time.
You could just pray. That's exactly.
Mm-hmm. And then she was okay. She had surrounded by women. She was going to be fine. We both had really amazing experiences, and we shared them because we were together, but we weren't together, and that still worked. So I can see how, as somebody who's new to the concept, it does seem very prehistoric or medieval to separate the sexes.
Jason, I don't know about the European schools. I don't know if the universities and colleges there were always both sexes
only up to like
come to study.
Mid 1900s. Up to that point, your likes of Oxford and Cambridge, they were just men. I don't think women could even go to a version of them. It was just for men.
And I think that is an example they could certainly understand. And as I said, it was to the women. It is now in the modern day to the women's advantage to go to a school where they don't mix the men and women.
Mm.
But that's not how they are.
So on the flip side of that, we're going to find that there are many synagogues throughout the conservative and reform movement that are mixed. So you'll sit next to your wife, and to be honest, again, I quite like that as well.
But again, it depends on the congregation. There are blanket statements people make about Reform and Conservative and Orthodox synagogues, and they're not always accurate. So if you go to a Reform congregation that is more traditionally minded, you might have not a mechitza, which is a wall of separation. Wall can be defined as 2 feet high or 12 feet high, but you can have a wall of some kind of separation. You may not have the mechitza, but you might have men will drift over to this side, women will drift over to that side, and that's how they run the Reform service. So by and large, yes, you're right. The vast majority of Reform congregations and conservative congregations will have mixed seating between the sexes. Okay.
But not all.
But not all. And In some places, believe it or not Orthodox, but nevertheless, they'll have a men's section, they will have a women's section, and the section in the middle is for mixed seating. And you'll have families separate, and you'll have families stay together by being in the middle section. So it varies all over the place. And again, Jason, the reason why the Reform movement became the Reform movement was to grab the Jews as they were leaving the Jewish community in Judaism and kind of like give them a place to go to keep them within the Jewish circle, which by and large worked. And then you get the philosophy that comes with reforming, and then you have the breakoff of the conservative movement, which is an interesting story. In the 1800s, the American Reform movement had a banquet, and there are differing stories on why this happened. But the main guy of the Reform movement in the United States was Isaac Mayer Wise. And he envisioned a unified Jewish community in the United States. He knew what was happening at the time and before in Europe. And he did not want that split to take place in the United States. He created a Siddur, a prayer book, which he called Minhag America, the American customs. Not reform, but American, okay, and he was trying to keep everybody unified. He himself kept kosher. He himself kept Shabbat. And then he decided to have a banquet for all the religious leaders and community leaders held in Chicago or Detroit, one of those two. And there are differing stories about why this happened. There were people who worked with Isaac Mayer Wise who wanted a complete split between the Reform and the what we would call the Orthodox. And the people who made the assumptions and had made these same assumptions for 2,000 years, plus 2,000 more years. According to one rendition, when he was going over the menu at this massive hotel, he said, we're going to be very formal and we're going to start with a fish. So what did they serve? They served shrimp for the fish. Other people think, see, that's something that Isaac Mayer Wise, who was the leader of the American Reform movement, would never have done. But his cohorts, also the Reform movement, may have sabotaged him. So we're not, historians are never quite sure exactly what happened. But what happened is that doing that, many of the people got up and walked out of the banquet. And they formed what they called conservative Judaism, to conserve Jewish traditions and halacha. And then once they did that, then they came out with a philosophy of conservative Judaism to rationalize and justify what they were doing, because they were not saying we need to stay Orthodox, okay, but they were trying to conserve Judaism because of the inroads of the Reform. So that's really the beginning.
So, regardless of what the branch of Judaism might be, what can a person expect if it's Friday night, right? And you turn up, right, and services usually occur around sunset or a little time after, depending again, where you are in the town.
Again, it depends. My congregation, and remember, it is a congregation of scientists, Jason. What I'm very fond of saying is my congregation are almost all engineers and scientists. They either work for NASA, or they work for oil companies, or they work for companies that contract with NASA, or they work with companies that contract with oil companies. But they're scientists and engineers. Many or most or almost all have their master's degrees and PhDs, and so do their husbands. And it's true. I'm not joking.
I believe it.
Okay, so because they were scientists, they said, look, if you take a look at daylight savings time and you take a look at when the average is about 7:30 over the year, so our services are set at 7:30. So sometimes during part of the year, we're starting services when it's still light. Sometimes sundown had happened an hour and a half beforehand.
But sometimes it's right on the money.
And most, I'd say around, you know, how about this? During one season out of the 4 seasons, it'll be exactly accurate.
Great. So I'm new and I turn up.
Absolutely.
And what do I need to bring?
To bring nothing, except as I said earlier, it would be nice to be dressed nicely. Okay. There are some things that you have to understand from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the first thing is Jews don't handle money on Shabbat, on the Sabbath. Okay, it's breaking the spirit of the Shabbat, and it's breaking the law of Shabbat. You don't handle money. That means there's no passing the plate. So they don't have to worry about, are they going to have to donate? That doesn't happen at a synagogue. Second thing they have to understand is that Judaism is a liturgical faith. There's a liturgy. There's a set text that you go through. And it's a whole different discussion about the purpose and function of a siddur, of praying, davening, okay? But we are a liturgical faith, and that means there's a set text so that there's a book that we go through for each one of the services that we do over the course of the week. And Shabbat is no different. So usually, depends on who's doing the printing, which congregation you're at, what denomination they're part of, which publisher they decided to go with their version of a prayer book. Most of the time, you'll have the Hebrew on the right and the English on the left. And the book is a Hebrew book that happens to have English in it. It's not an English book that happens to have Hebrew. And because it's a Hebrew book that happens to have English, the book will open on the right to left, which is the way Hebrew is read, right to left. Okay.
I just say so on my first visit, I went with my wife and she was raised Catholic, and she found it very comfortable because it was exactly the type of service she was used to.
Right.
I think the Catholics probably borrowed a lot because there was
yes, that was us.
Very set profile. There's a call and response. There's one person at the front is leading you in where you're going. And although we didn't really understand any of the words, there was an English. In fact, there's Hebrew English, and then there was like a phonetic version of the Hebrew. So if you wanted to sing along, you could do it. Didn't have a clue what we were saying, but it gave you the option, and that was very helpful.
I want to touch. Excuse me. I want to touch on that a little bit, but you're right. And what I say is, where do you think they stole it from? But you're nicer than I am. Okay. There will be someone at the front of the congregation, and they will be reading the service, going through the service, chanting the service, which, depending on the synagogue you go to, can be all Hebrew, can be mostly Hebrew, can be half Hebrew, half English, can be 3/4 English. It just depends. By the way, halachically, you're supposed to pray. Okay, it's okay to pray in the language you know. Like most of what the Reform movement does, the first thing they do is they look at what the rabbinic writings of 2,000 plus years have to say about it. Sometimes act accordingly, sometimes not. So the conservative movement also does the same thing. But the base of the service is how the Orthodox do it. So let's talk about the Orthodox first. You walk into the service, there's going to be a separation between men and women for the reasons that we said before. The service is going to be led almost entirely in Hebrew. The vast majority of Orthodox congregations, the person leading the service has their back to the congregation. It's not like in a church or conservative or Reformed congregation. Again, depends on the congregation, but where they're facing the people, facing the the people, the pews. Every so often, because they're doing the entire thing in Hebrew, someone will usually call out the page number, because look, Judaism is regardless of what denomination, is a balance between being an individual person but being part of the community. So there are community responses, but nobody is telling you how fast or how slow you read your service in your hand. So they're going to call out the page numbers, kind of like to let you know if you're falling behind, if you're too far ahead. Also, they're going to come to certain passages in the prayer book, in the Siddur, which is basically where everybody sings. So that also tells you, are you doing your personal prayers at the right rate of speed?
Right, because there are some prayers under the repeating, some are when you're reading along, and then there are some private. There's one particular point where you have a chance to pray privately. You read through privately, and then you pray privately yourself.
Absolutely, and see, that's the beauty of Jewish services. Okay, we have a text in front of us. It's in our hand. We're reading it, but you don't know what I'm praying, and I don't know what you're praying. It balances me being an individual and you being an individual, but we're there together, Jason. We're praying as one. So I'm part of the community. I'm part of the group, but I'm also myself, because I can be reading along, or I can be having my own conversation, outpouring my soul to God who's listening. And you don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what you're doing.
What about head covering for men? How does that work in different situations?
Men have to wear their head covered. Just flatly, they have to wear their heads covered. In my congregation, we've had non-Jews come and visit. They get all freaky about yarmulkes, and I say to them, so what you're telling me is, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, except when you come to a synagogue? Please, we're asking you to wear the yarmulke. Okay, we're not going to kick somebody out, because remember, they're not obligated to wear yarmulke. They're not Jewish. Mm. But they should have the respect for our synagogue. And maybe in 21 plus years of being the rabbi there, maybe 3 times I've had, somebody who's visiting, whatever, refuse to wear the yarmulke. We're not going to kick them out. I just think they're weird.
But the guys that come in, they don't have to have their own. There are going to be yarmulkes at the.
Usually they will have their own. Because there are those who don't wear yarmulke all the time.
But it's the first time. It's your first time there. There's going to be one there for you, right?
Absolutely, almost invariably. That in my experience with any denomination, including Reform and Conservative, they're going to have what's it called, a bin, a container where yarmulkes are in there, and you just take one and put it on. If you're going to an Orthodox synagogue and you're being accompanied, or you're going as and you're a woman, I would also remind you not just to dress nicely, but to dress modestly. Okay, bluntly speaking, Judaism has a very different view of modesty than the rest of the world. Okay, the bottom line: if you want people to get to know you, dress modestly. If you want people to get to know your character, who you are, dress modestly. Otherwise, they're just getting to know your body. So, bottom line, that's it. It's a different approach to sex, sexuality, sensuality, and a lot of people don't get it, don't understand why. But that's the bottom line. And so you do want to also remember to dress modestly, actually, if you're going to any synagogue, Reformed, Conservative, or Orthodox.
So what can people expect from the layout when they go through the... So generally there'll be a set of doors that get you into a building, and then there's some sort of hallway that goes off into various parts. But when you go into the actual sanctuary, what can they expect from inside the building?
All right. Most sanctuaries in the United States are laid out the same way. Excuse me again. And that is, in the very front, there is, and pardon my usage of these terms, a stage area, an elevated area, so that people everywhere in the sanctuary can see them. There'll be a shulchan, a table. Okay, some people call that the pulpit, or or some people even call that the bema. Technically speaking, bema means the elevated area. So this is just the table on the bema. And that's where people leading the service will lead from. Again, sometimes most of the time facing the away from the congregation, sometimes facing the congregation, but that's where the service is led from. That's also, okay, usually in front of the ark, but probably closer to the pulpit area, usually suspended from the ceiling, but not necessarily, is an eternal light, a ner tamid. If you take a look at the Torah, the description of the sanctuary that wandered around with the ex-Hebrew slaves, the Hebrew ex-slaves in the wilderness, is the model for which they do the architecture for the sanctuary, and it talks about the Torah being in a holy closet. Okay, closet is Aron, holy is Kadosh. Aron Kodesh, you take the first two letters and it becomes ark. It doesn't mean ark like, Noah was floating down the water on the ark. It's actually a word that comes from what do they call that? The first letters of a word become a word?
An acronym.
Of Aron Kodesh, which is the ark. The ark is where the Torah scrolls are kept. And it's in the Torah, it says that you will have this light outside the what we call the ark, and it will burn continually. So the eternal light is representing God's presence, God's eternal covenant with the Jews, and it's a light that never is supposed to go out. It's not magic, if they use a light bulb, the bulb can burn out, but it's symbolic of the eternal nature of God and God's covenant with the Jewish people. But ground level again is the ark, the Aron Kodesh, the holy closet, for lack of a better translation, where they're going to keep the Torah scrolls. And whenever the ark is opened, everybody's going to rise out of respect, because that is it's what God gave the Jewish people. And as such, it's not God, we're not worshiping the Torah, but we are in fact worshiping God who gave it. And the ark can be intricately carved wood. It can be a heavy curtain. It can be, there's a billion different ways to design and construct the ark that's in front of the congregation.
Is it the case the ark will be on the wall between us and the Temple Mount?
Exactly. In other words, when you face the ark, you're not really facing the ark, you're facing the Temple Mount. And Jason, if my congregation sees this, they're scientists. They had mathematical formulas, electronic, digital, and compasses, so that when you stand in the center of my sanctuary and you are facing the center of the ark, when I say you are facing the Temple Mount, I mean you are facing the Temple Mount. And they did all this, scientific analysis to make sure that you were exactly facing the ark, which is sometimes funny because, if you're off to the sides, you have to face in a direction that's parallel to being in the center, facing the center of the ark. At any rate, it's my congregation. They are a congregation of scientists, and they act like it.
So you turn up at your synagogue, you say hi to the guy. There's normally a greeter, and
usually there's a greeter. Not all the time. I mean, I would hope that a congregation would have a greeter, but if you come into services late, 5-10 minutes, maybe the greeter's gone in for his own prayers.
That's worth mentioning, right? That if we've got to the point in the service where the ark has been opened and the Torah scrolls come out, generally the doors are locked at that point.
Well, they're not. They're closed. I don't know if they're locked,
Right, but you can't get in. You shouldn't go
but
in.
you shouldn't go in out of respect. If you come in and you see that everybody in the congregation is standing, usually there's a window in to see. Usually, not always. And if they're standing up, don't go in. Wait till they sit down, then go in.
So you turn up. There'll be a greeter. If you're a guy and you haven't got one, they'll offer
Right.
a kipper. You can pop that on. Then you
Right.
find a seat. Is
Yes.
there a seating arrangement? Do
No.
people have traditional seats, or you just sit where you
Well,
like?
human beings have a tendency to sit in the same place every time. Yeah, they're going to hand you a prayer book, okay, if they are, experts in the field of welcoming someone into a sanctuary. It's going to always be turned to the right page when they hand it to you. And they'll say, "We're right here." Um, so you'll take the prayer book, or depending on the structure of the sanctuary, you may sit down and the book is in a little the back of the of the seat of the person in front of you. And you just pick up, and they're going to help you. They're going to say, whisper to you, page 58 or whatever. So you turn to the page and you follow along. My congregation loves to sing, so it's not just davening parts of the service, it's everybody singing along. They love to sing. Other congregations, they hear the cantor chant the service. Okay, sometimes they'll sing along with the cantor. It varies so much, even within movements of Judaism, from one congregation to another congregation. If the people sing everything, if they sit back and let the leaders lead the service and let them, just sit back and enjoy the ambiance. If most of the people follow along word for word, it just varies from place to place, person to person, and they have to understand that. And Jason, I should have said this in the very beginning. There is something called shul shopping, and if they are lucky enough to live in a city that has multiple synagogues, they need to go to every one of them, okay, and meet the rabbi, go to their services, meet the people. Are they nice people? Do they warmly welcome you there? Does the rabbi, if they even have a sermon, does the rabbi, when he gives a sermon, is it interesting to you? Get a feel for the place, get a feel for the people, because these people are the ones who are going to, please God, develop into your friends in the synagogue. And, if you've got, and by the way, not just within the same movement, but also the other movements too, because you may find a comfort zone if you are just beginning with Judaism in something, I don't know what, more familiar to you in the church service that you came from. And I'm not calling Reform and Conservative congregations churches. That is insulting, and Jews shouldn't do that to fellow Jews. But it still might be more to what you know, to first go to Reform or Conservative, and over time, when you get used to a service, you might prefer the more Orthodox. So don't limit yourself, but open yourself up to the possibility and just go.
So we just worth mentioning. We just backtrack for 2 minutes that shul. So this is like for someone that really doesn't know. Shul and temple are two other words for a synagogue.
Shul, temple, synagogue. Let me explain something. I can talk about the United States, not Europe. Okay. Shul, which is exactly the same root and beginning for the word school, is how many people refer to their place of worship, their synagogue. Okay. If you're on the East Coast, usually, but not always, the word synagogue or shul will refer to an Orthodox or conservative congregation, and the word temple will be used to refer to a Reformed congregation. Once you get to the south or west of the Mississippi, you can have a Orthodox synagogue called a temple, and you can have a Reformed congregation called a synagogue. It usually follows that synagogue is Orthodox or conservative, and temple can be either conservative or Reform. But when you get west of the Mississippi, and it's the South, it's not always so defined. So you have to remember that.
So services consist of open prayer, reciting text, listening to
Right,
text, and
right.
private prayer.
Sing in the text.
Mm.
Okay, there's a lot of things that are sung. A prayer book depends on the prayer book, depends on the publisher, who the congregation went with, because there are plenty of publishers within each movement, by the way. Many, but not all, will have a transliteration, so that there's the original Hebrew to the service, there's the translation for the U.S. into English of what it means, and then somewhere on the page, on one or the other side, will be a transliteration, which means using English letters to spell out how the Hebrew is pronounced. Like shalom isn't shin lamed vav mem sofit, it's shalom. You say shalom and you just read the four-letter word for peace in Hebrew. You see what I'm saying? So the Hebrew, the translation, the transliteration.
There are going to be parts in the service as well where you stand up and sit down. Sometimes
Yes.
quite a lot of.
High holidays are well known for being stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down.
If you are an older person and you have issues, will you be frowned upon for not standing up, sitting down all the time?
No, because other people who have been there for years, who've also aged while they're there, can no longer stand up and sit down as they used to. So you do what you can. And congregations usually are going to tell people, we're coming to page 35, please rise. Or even if nobody announces to please rise, the congregation will know they're about to rise. And when you see them stand up, you stand up. When they sit down, you sit down. Again, Judaism, we're not on the little pad things at Catholic churches for people to kneel on. There's no kneeling. So you don't have to worry about, kneeling.
How long can we expect a regular Erev Shabbat service? Does that completely depend on the rabbi, the service,
it also depends on the congregation, the denomination. Look, up until the modern period, you get ready for Shabbat, whatever that entails, the nicest clothes, the best dinner. You prepare for the Shabbat. The mother lights the Shabbat candles. The males go to services because, remember, they're the ones obligated. Women are not obligated. They can, but they're not obligated to go. And when they come back, they have the meal. The service would have been 30 minutes, okay? And that includes everything. And you're walking to services. You have the 30-minute service. You walk back, and then you have the meal. And your Friday night is spent more at home than it is at a synagogue. In the conservative and reform congregations, they may have gotten rid of repetitions a few hundred years ago, but they also added a sermon. So there'll be some sort of sermonic speech, given by the rabbi or whoever does their sermons. And it'll usually be about an hour. So either experience can be an hour and a half. Walking to services, having the service and walking back, or the service itself.
So you've just had your first service. It's maybe an hour and a half, and
it's probably more like an hour, but yes.
And it's ended. Yeah. What happens now on a Friday night?
All right. I can't remember how long ago the concept was actually developed by a famous Israeli poet who called it the Oneg Shabbat. Oneg Shabbat means the joy of the Sabbath, and it's for socializing. So they will have, I don't know what to call them, Jason, finger foods, desserts. It's not going to be a heavy meal with, steak. It's going to be a light.
Like a buffet or,
yeah. But desserts.
Yeah.
We're talking Friday night here. Okay, Saturday, most congregations will provide a light lunch after the service is over. It enables people to talk to each other and to socialize. And besides praying together, it also helps make community. And so, there'll be a different room, and they'll have little cups of wine for people, or grape juice if they do that. Don't drink it. Wait for them to recite the Kiddush. Okay.
Right, so we should talk about that as it happens.
Okay.
So yeah, they'll bring out generally there'll be a challah, the ritual bread on a board, and there'll be some wine in little cups.
Right.
Can you
And
explain what the blessing and the prayer is and how that works?
Okay. Remember that Judaism does not bless things. The rest of the blessing for the wine is praised are you, O God, who creates the fruit of the vine. We're not blessing the wine. We're blessing or praising, thanking God for the wine, because the wine represents in Judaism the sweetnesses and joys of life. And that's all it ever represented in Judaism, not blood, ever.
In fact, while we do that, if you have a Christian heritage in yourself, you're going to recognize from the Last Supper, and you can look it up in your New Testament, when Jesus broke the bread, it says, and he blessed, and then in parentheses, they may put in it, but that's completely wrong. The text actually says he blessed, so he's probably doing the same blessing over for that bread.
It's a rabbinic formulation, Baruch Atah, etc. Okay, and therefore it 2,200 years old, probably he was. It's very possible he was doing the same formulation of the blessing through which we thank God for the sweetness and joy of Shabbat through the sweetness and joy of the wine or grape juice. Okay. Yeah, someday we could talk about just the idea of why they're serving grape juice in addition to wine. When Jews handle alcohol, it's to sanctify the time. Jews never did alcohol. Hey, let's go get drunk. There's nothing else to do. And one of the reasons given for why the Jewish community has one of the lowest incidences of alcoholism and drunkenness is because when we handle wine, we handle it to sanctify and we invoke God. It's kind of hard to, go on a bender when every time you're reciting, you're thinking about God because you're reciting the blessing before you drink it. So, at any rate, but there'll be wine and there'll be a challah. That's another discussion too, by the way. The bread, nothing talks about community more than breaking bread together. Okay, usually the hamotzi is done only before the meal over the bread. Okay, if there's bread at the meal. Okay, and it represents the thanking God for the entirety of the meal, not just the bread. But a lot of congregations, because it also creates community by breaking bread together, will not only have the Kiddush, but also will have a hamotzi. Let me back up. The blessing over the bread. Again, we're not blessing the bread. We're blessing God for the bread. Praised are you, eternal our God. Remember, it's talking about God, not the bread. Praised are you, O God, who brings forth bread from the earth. So we're not blessing the bread. We're blessing God. We're praising God for the bread. And then we have the buffet table, I guess you call it, of the light sweets. Okay, Saturday, it's the same basic process, although the blessing for the wine is a shorter blessing. And there's still a hamotzi, and then there's usually, most congregations will have a light lunch. It's not a steak meal. It's probably like bagels and cream cheese and lox, or just bagels and cream cheese, and somebody will bring a tuna salad. Somebody, depends on how they run the kitchen at the individual synagogues and what they usually have. But it varies from synagogue to synagogue too, even within a movement. So, but usually, and you sit down and you eat and talk to each other. And that's a great time to meet the rabbi and ask the rabbi all the questions you have about the Bible, Judaism, whatever, and get an idea of what the rabbi's like. Is this somebody you want to make into your, for lack of a better term, spiritual leader?
Yeah, so
So
make sure you've got things that you do want to find out, and listen to their arguments. Just because they say something that you don't necessarily agree with, that's sometimes down to you not understanding why. I mean, you're
Jason,
going to learn, right?
yeah, absolutely. What I beg people to do, beg them to do when they talk to me on the phone or email me or whatever, before they come to the congregation to talk to me in person, get a notebook. Keep it with you at all times. And any time and every time you have any question about the Bible, Judaism, or the Jewish community, write down your questions so that you don't forget what you want to ask. And then bring your notebook, and then we just go over the questions. And almost every single synagogue that I know of, gamut of the entire movements of Judaism, will have an introduction to Judaism class, or they will have adult education classes, not Sunday school for the little kiddies, but for adults. Jewish learning is so vast and so broad that there is no way to know everything. So almost every synagogue has classes, introduction to Judaism classes, adult education classes on a variety of topics, taught by a variety of people in or out of the synagogue. And that's another opportunity, usually, to take your notebook filled with all your questions, and before or after, ask the rabbi, I have some questions to go over. But if you write it down, you don't forget what you want to ask. It drives me crazy when somebody says, oh, Rabbi, I had a question I wanted to ask you, but I forgot what it was. Well, then I can't help you. I can't. There's something going on in your head I can't
Mm.
respond to. Write it down so you don't forget what you want to ask. Keep it in the same notebook. By the way, over time, you will see that questions change and become more and more intricate, more and more, deeper and deeper questions. You'll see the style of the question change. That's how you see, someone growing into
Mm.
Judaism. But if you write it down, you don't forget what you want to ask, and then come talk to me. That's what I tell everybody. And that's what I would tell anybody who's going to go to a synagogue. Write down your questions. Every time you think of a question, write it down, and then go talk to the rabbi.
And if he's got a whole lot of people, he's probably going to try and give you time. If he can't give you time, he'll arrange time. And if he doesn't, ask him. Say you're free for a coffee during the week. Don't
And,
think he's fobbing you off. He might have 50, 100, 150 people to look after that night.
and in the larger congregations, that will be true. In the smaller congregations, look, rabbis love talking to people who care about Judaism, who want to know about Judaism, who are studying Judaism, because they love Judaism and they're studying it too. So they love talking to other people. Rabbis get accused of, well, you do so much for the people converting and not enough for the, and that may be true because, like us, they're interested in Judaism and they want to learn more and more and more and more. So most rabbis would just love to sit down and talk to someone who's interested in Judaism and ask questions about it.
Okay, so we're approaching about an hour on the recording. Is it?
You're no fun.
Ah, yeah, you don't have to edit it. Do you have anything else that you want to throw in before I round it up?
Going to
You were talking
services.
about warmth. What did you mean by that?
Okay. There is a joke. Maybe you've heard it. I hope you have not. And it is a joke, but all jokes have some element of truth. When you go into a synagogue for the first time, what are the first 5 words that you hear? You're sitting in my seat. And I have to tell people that, and I'm going to try to word this as politely as I can, the Jewish community, like every other community, has its not nice people as well. Jews can be a-holes as well. That's what I really want to say. So if you meet someone who is not as nice as you would like, everybody else also knows that that person is not as nice as you'd like, as they'd like. So take it with a grain of salt. It's not about you, it's about them. Some congregations are very standoffish. Some of them have to be, like you were talking, Jason, in Europe, because there's terrorism. My congregation also has its share, not of terrorism, thank God, but of nutcases who come in off the street. And I've had people try to take over my pulpit and preach their Jesus to the synagogue and get escorted bodily out and told if they come back, they'll be trespassing and thrown in jail. It happens, usually between the Christmas and Easter season. But my point is that congregations will vary in the warmth that they show to themselves, to each other, and to newcomers as well. Don't take that personally. It's not about you, it's about them. The other side of the same coin is that if you are not a warm person, if you are not outgoing enough just to say hi to a new person you don't know and introduce yourself, don't blame the congregation because you also are standoffish. Okay? I mean, use your head about what you're doing. So some congregations will be very, very warm and welcoming and accepting and bring you in like a long-lost brother. Please God, my congregation does that. If they don't, I'll shoot them. Okay, just kidding. No, I'm not. But other congregations may or may not be warm. Okay, and you hope that you'll find the warm one, but don't see it as it's about you. You've got to see it as it's about them. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I find that very. I'm that person. I'm the very cold one. I find it very difficult to talk to a group of people I don't really know. My wife is brilliant at it. She'll just roll up and start talking, and
Right.
I grab onto the coattails. But I know how it can be. You go into a room full of people, especially if you're kind of in awe. Like the first time I went to synagogue, I thought, oh, these are all Jewish people, and probably they're actually, yeah, the first Jewish people I met face to face. And I'm of the opinion that they're doing everything I want to do and know everything I want to know. And you find out that's not usually completely the case.
No, it isn't.
And it's conversations to be had off that. But the point is, you'll only get into it what you put into it for the most
Right.
part. And
exactly true of life and everything else too, and the service itself. Every year, right before Rosh Hashanah services start, on the first night of Rosh Hashanah, the first service for Rosh Hashanah, I always have a great big sign. It's what I call signs and wonders. The rabbi shows you a sign, and then they start wondering about their rabbi. And at minimum, I show the exact same sign I've shown for decades. And that says, I wish I could show it to you because then it has a better effect. It says, private, no strangers allowed. Okay? And I show that to everybody. And of course, they read it as private, no strangers allowed. And that's not how my synagogue reads it. Once I show it to everybody, okay, then I say, okay, let's read this the Shar Shalom way. Private? No, strangers allowed.
That's great.
In other words, the way in which a person chooses to read a sentence determines what they get out of the sentence. The same thing is not only true for the sign, this is what I say to them, it is also true for the High Holiday Prayer Book. And how you choose to read it is going to determine what you yourself personally get out of it. It's not just up to the leaders of the synagogue to see to it that you have a good experience for Shabbat or a holiday or holy day or whatever. It's also up to you. And so, then I start the service, put away the sign, start the service. But that's something to also take into consideration. What you put into your experience of going to a new synagogue, a new place, is going to heavily be determined by what you get. What you put into it is going to determine what you get out of it.
So we are nearly at the end now, but what I want to ask you is, why should anyone watching this decide that this coming Friday they're going to go to the synagogue? What's the point?
For those people who have left Christianity and they are searching, Jewish services provide a wonderful way to commune with God and with other people through the prayer service. It is uplifting, it is meaningful, it is moving, and if they no longer are getting a service like that because they have left Christianity, thank God, they still need the spiritual connection in their life. Services are about connection. Synagogues are about connection. Every denomination, I don't care. It's about connecting to God, and it's connecting to each other. And it's connecting to our faith, our religion, our Judaism. start over. It's connecting to other people through connecting to our religion and our prayer service. And if they don't have it in their lives, I think they need to find it. I think that it's for their mental, spiritual, social, and even physical health. It's for their benefit. Just go. Don't worry about, are they going to like me, not like me? Am I going to like them, not like them? Just go and experience it. And again, you can't get everything you need to learn about it by going once. Every synagogue deserves, I would say, 3 or 4 times to go to the service before you really get a feel for the community, the rabbi, the people, the ambiance, the warmth or lack of it. You have to go a few times before you really get a sense of it. And slowly over time, you'll make the service your own. You will tame the service, and you will find that the service also tames you.
Wonderful. Well, I think that's it. So if you at home are listening and you've enjoyed it, please give the video a thumbs up. If you've got questions that you'd like to put to Rabbi Federo, leave them under the video. Don't be shy. Just throw them under there, and we can address them in future recordings. You
Good.
can find more of Rabbi Stuart Federo over on William Hall's channel, Tanakh Talk, where he's doing, I think it's a weekly show now, right?
Yes. Thank you. Yes.
You can find more of him there. You can also tell us about your book.
My book is called Judaism and Christianity: A Contrast. It is a counter-missionary book, and it explains why we believe what we believe in stark, hard, harsh contrast with Christian theology. It does have a section about proof text, but that's not really the meat of the book. The meat of the book is, the Jewish view and why we have it on God, the idea of the devil versus the idea of the Satan, sin, sacrifice, atonement, forgiveness, Messiah, the real basic elements of Christianity and why Judaism finds them unbiblical.
And
I also have a website. It's whatjewsbelieve.org. Whatjewsbelieve.org. An earliest version of whatjewsbelieve.org was translated into Spanish as creenciajudia.org. And I also have apps both for iPhone and for Android called Jewish Mission Control. For Android, you have to look at Jewish Mission Control V2, version 2. But I have apps of my website that are for both Android and iPhone, and the website and the book.
Fabulous. Yeah. Everywhere you look on the internet, you're going to find Rabbi Federo. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Rabbi Federo, for giving us your time.
My pleasure. I've missed you, Jason. I'm glad we're doing this.
And thank you guys at home for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We'll see you very soon.